Okay, welcome back after the morning tea break. I have our next submitter, which is Lucklaw Farm Limited and the trustees of Kerikeri-Waipapa Spatial Plan and Grace Sturgis. Good morning to you all. We'll get straight into it and I'll hand it over to you to present your legal and plan submission.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of once process, we've just provided, we'll table a copy of some legal submissions from Stuart Ryan.
So Mr. Ryan's not going to be here.
He's not.
Okay.
So those can be sort of taken free. You probably don't want to delve into too much. They just deal with sort of preliminary legal issues raised by the submitters and provide response to those. So if I could just introduce myself, my name is Mark Seaman, training consultant, engaged by Lucklaw Farms and trustees of Taranaki Trust to provide expert evidence in relation to planning. I'll introduce our team. So Mr. Sturgis is here for these submitters. On my left is Mr. Scanlon, who's dealing with traffic issues. Ms. Dixon, who's presenting on ecology issues. And Ms. Gilbert, who's presenting on landscape. And we also have online Gavin Sol, who is available to answer any questions on wastewater. Mr. Blythe, who presented evidence on hydrological matters, unfortunately isn't available this hearing. If there's any questions related to his evidence, we can provide response from that. We've had the opportunity to listen to concerns of the further submitters through the process of the hearing and the evidence presented to date. We highlight some of the key mechanisms in response to the issue raised. As I've mentioned, some brief legal submissions have been provided to those issues. So, just in terms of the overall position, my rebuttal evidence sets out the position of the submitters alongside the Rezoning Request. Essentially, the proposal sets the insertion of a master plan to enable the comprehensive approach to restoration and enhancement of communities. It's the subject. The insertion of the master plan is the key and we've maintained our best efforts to provide for clear development of the site, rural lifestyle zoning, general residential zoning and mixed use zoning is the site, and also obviously balance being rural production. The zoning request and submissions does include land that's not owned by the submitters, in particular the blocks in the area A of the rural lifestyle zone. The reason that was included was that it seemed a logical extension in terms of the rural lifestyle zoning across the essentially the northern part of the settlement ring of Puka. We'd undertaken initial consultation with the owners of that land, and at the stage of discussing it with them, happy to see how the process proceeded. Mr. Sturgis has advised that there is a possibility that they may file a formal position on this, which we thought may be coming to the hearing panel, but we weren't sure that that's exactly how that was going to happen. From a planning point of view, my position is that the inclusion of those three sites is a logical extension of the rural lifestyle zone, and it makes sense, particularly due to the slightly smaller block layout of the sites in the rural production zone. If the owners of that land would prefer rural production zone as notified being retained on those blocks, this doesn't impact based on the balance of the rezoning sort submitters. I consider the proposal to take into account Mātauranga and Māori principles through the policy that's been provided in the development period. Provisions for subdivision land use and restoration activities and implementation through rules for information requirements for consents. Provides a significant and novel approach to enable input for mana whenua. Mr. Sturgis is happy to receive information. We listen to the evidence that was presented in relation to mana whenua concerns. Mr. Sturgis is happy to receive information if there is issues about the merits of what's been proposed. We heard a lot about the lack of engagement, but we're unsure about any particular issues with the merits of what's been proposed. So we're happy to engage with that in relation to cultural values, as well as receiving for consenting process as we've outlined in the actions. So I know that in response to some of the other issues that were raised, the proposal as set out includes sensitive colour requirements for build development, provision for ongoing animal and pest plant pest management through subdivision, which can address things like pet ownership and significant restoration activities. So the proposal seeks to protect and enhance natural freshwater systems and, where possible, improve water protection. So this will have beneficial outcomes in terms of water bodies on the site, on the farm, in terms of the lakes and stream located on the site, which is the main area that drains out in terms of the residential development area. So in relation to infrastructure outcome, I just acknowledge that there was no evidence from council's experts on infrastructure, so it's a difficult one to respond to. We had some commentary in the section 42A report around concern about funding and ongoing upkeep, but it was difficult to respond to because we don't know the cost implications of what they're making. So Mr. Souls outlined potential for improvement of the existing Ringfooter wastewater treatment plant, and he's presented that in terms of the existing operation of the plant in relation to the infrastructure hearing designation. So yeah, his evidence outlines the fact that the further can be developed, it's feasible for the site, and it can be used to additionally treat water from the existing Ringfooter plant. We put in there an option, should the council not wish to be vested with that infrastructure for a privately owned system. We remain happy to engage with the district council in relation to the rebuttal traffic statement, Mr. Collins, we're happy to incorporate appropriate provisions. We're happy to undertake any further discussion with council officers as well, and potentially to provide an agreed statement active through expert comments and some breaks, and then the system can be should the proposed request of rezoning not occur, the land will virtual rural reduction. In my opinion, it's an inferior outcome by biodiversity values and planning status quo in terms of limited farming utility and significant restoration. Probably in terms of the order, Mr. Sol is currently in conference down in Christchurch. There may be also some questions for him. Mr. Sol, if you have any comments for the panel.
I had a question about the term that you considered that proposal took into account Mātauranga Māori principles.
Yes.
And given that as a planner, you, and the purpose of that to recognise and provide for the relationship of Māori in their culture and traditions
Yes.
with their ancestral lands, water, wahi tapu and other taonga. How is the proposal provided for that?
So in terms of that enables input into the so it's the kind of purpose of including that as an additional assessment matter. The consideration of resource consents and subdivision is a significant that engagement, require that engagement before it consents lodged. So it will be, you'll be aware that there's not necessarily any resource consent. So and I think that provides a really important step in terms of engagement. I think I was possibly using the I'd suggested that approach to Mr. Sturgis. His comment was that's the least we could do. So
I'm happy to add some more to that, Felicity, if that would help be a little bit more simple. Just keeping it straightforward, what's happened today. Out on that land, the key issue is that the Nanga, right, have through the treaty settlement, have through the fact that it's an in-principle settlement, DOC have to then act as if the settlement's gone through. That's one of their policies. And that is sort of something that I'm happy to just let people know and just talk. So we end up with a lot of dialogue on Dr. Kaitaia, some dialogue now, strategic plans of Dr. Kaitaia. In Ponte. And then we also end up with other matters that then represent a large boundary that the farm has in both the Crown, basically through the marginal strip, right, which then under that settlement agreement, which in the settlement, the marginal strip, when you talk about our plan, it goes right round to Waniputa, because that's that area that we're taking, and we're trying to. The fact is that when you end up with this treaty settlement period, and yet leadership is through the Runanga, but then there's an issue with that whole thing and the settlement process and negotiations, taking positions about whether you're, you're trying to do a negotiation when you've got this going on at the same time, and it makes it difficult. And to operate together, there has to be a lot of correspondence talking. Typically, that has happened through my wife, Andrea, right, who quickly found the party, someone from possibly more than Moana, right, Hapu, who has been very close to Andrea, and they've been through a lot of issues together. And it's been actually, I think, very valuable for both. They both have input. And there's more the farmer who was quite happy doing rural production if she was allowed to. But of course, those lands, that area now is not rural production out there. It's what is it? General coastal under the zoning, I think something like that. And it's the ratings on one is lifestyle. That's that headland property, and the ratings on the other are mixed use rating. So, we've basically been told by the council, now is the time to try to tidy all this up. Right, so that what you're going to raise it, because that, you know, it's $40,000 a year of rates on that property. And to make it produce enough rurally, for rural production, that's a fairly aggressive change in the way the land is being managed today. So people seem to think in the local community that what is there today is what's we're being told to do in the future. It's quite different. And Andrew's talked that through a lot with the contacts. And you know, there's been a change of the guard somewhere over in the Haiti Tai Parangai. And that guard is changing, and it's really nice to see a new group coming through, taking control of it. But that said and done, particularly myself, my relationship was always with the Ulrich brothers, you know, through, and particularly on a day-to-day level with Randolph, and we all miss them. And now mainly they're through to his brother Ulrich. So that was always the mechanism that this whole thing worked together with. And a lot of it is done, there's texts and conversations, but it's the usual farmers' wives network. So answering your question, the big issue that we all have is education, right? That was what was seen to be the problem. Everyone says we have to educate the people. I can remember meeting the mayor, previous mayor, and he was espousing how we must educate people. But unfortunately, you know, these are the educators of the world today. That's where everyone gets their information from. And, you know, photos pasted at a beach and people motocrossing on it, digging grains or whatever is what people learn from, not from what you say. So the key aspect in that plan that we developed was this concept of an educational centre over on that Pūwheki Road side. And at least we put something up where people have to then be educated before they move on to understand the whole reality of what is happening on that hill, and what its impacts are of the hill on how people behave and everything that we all notice, and also the history behind the area. So anyway, does that help? Over help?
No, that does help. I had a follow-up question about for the planner regarding, there was a word in section 7 that said that it was a novel approach to enable whenua as part of that process.
Yeah.
A question I had was, given all the expert reports have saying, you know, given that there's forever in the sand dunes, that we have had evidence that both the landowner and mana whenua are well aware of, why wasn't the agricultural impact assessment done at this time and presented as one of the reports?
I can answer that now. Normally we don't. There's an agreement with Heritage New Zealand. It's not talked about. So Heritage New Zealand are the people that you really should address yourself. So you'll see that they were the people supporting us, not in the farm rezoning particularly, but in the farm's application vehicles on beaches. And their support gives you the indication of where to head to for that. And there's things about this that various reasons, I think, overall, I think the Runanga as well is quite happy not to disclose.
But that's not the current sort of approach to dealing with mana whenua on projects of this nature though around the country.
No.
Early engagement is normally the norm, irrespective of what Mr. Ryan might say.
As you'll know, in their submissions to you, they're asking to have a say in this area. I think it's 398, isn't it? In the submissions is them asking to have this area identified, somewhere that they can have a say. So that's the key point to notice here. They're not saying that they're allowed to say anything under this RMA either. That's the point of all these submissions. It all intertwines for you. You just have to put us together.
So, Mr. Sturge, I think the question that was put to you was, given Haititai Marangai Marae was concerned about this and the knowledge of Kaiwi by both parties in the vicinity on the land.
They don't
Why,
know.
no, excuse me, the question that was put to you, why was the CIA not engaged earlier? Why is it now simply a process that happens after the development plan is approved?
So just in terms of the location, I think it's probably in terms of the location of the OEV in the area. Development was kept away from people. The rezoning is kept away from it. So
I understand how you've responded to that issue. The question though, has been put to you by Commissioner Foy, and I think it's an appropriate one. Because why, it mentioned in Ms. Gilbert's landscape assessment section, her evidence of cultural effects and there being significant tension. The question was put to you is that why haven't you engaged with iwi previously? Why is it now coming along, not to use the pejorative term, it's almost like an afterthought. Certainly in the evidence that they presented to us, and Mr. Sturgeon recorded being here to hear that, was that, they felt like, they were running really fast to try and catch up.
Yes.
When they felt they should have been engaged early on, and I would think that would be best practice.
Yeah. I think I'm going to give you a straight answer. Why that is.
Yeah, that's
You've asked a straight question. And the reason it's going on, right, has been involved in some parts of this. She's a trustee. She's now moving into the Ranga era, right, position. Right. And still, you have supporting her other trustees, and particularly even Robert Ulrich, potentially as a retired trustee. So these are something that you must understand in complicated areas like this, where you have multiple groups submitting as legal. You have Mr. Paul submitting as the Hatiaki group in the submission. He takes his Rohe right the way around the rim, but he only ever talks about, interesting, north of the Pufiki Hill. So in his submissions, he still has his areas there. He certainly has a known mandate for the road in, but the area there is quite complicated for a variety of reasons. That is why we're making this submission, to help you get through that, let the treaty process go on and let them do their thing, but in the same time, recognise that the people there who watch it and live on the site have the support and the backing from the district council. And today, the district council has not provided, or
Thank you,
always choosing to do the opposite.
Thank you, Mr. Sturgis. You promised me a straight answer to a straight question, and I'm not sure I've got it. So maybe Mr. Lang would maybe have, what we're talking about, where the CIOs are generally accepted as best practice, and why wasn't this pursued, at least the pursuit of one?
Certainly. The opportunity, so the summary of the submission was reasonably clear. The further submissions on it were limited. The opportunity for submissions on that opportunity wasn't taken up at all. So, and from what was known from the archaeological presentations of that, those areas are also areas for the existing. So the impact of rezoning the residential component, which is probably the area. Was set well away from those areas. So that's effectively the reason why. I agree that his practice engage as has been submissions is not
if that had been successful, that would address those cultural effects that she addressed. Her evidence and possibly that really helped the question of this as a proposal. I suppose that was the nature of the question. You were trying to, I think your answer, Mr. Sturgeon, was saying it's I think you're saying that it's a complex arrangement and you've just tried to deal with who you thought was the person.
Even Nina was right. When Nina read that out, you'll notice she did add to the words there. And they were important, I think 8 words that she said. And so she did her bit to make sure she hadn't offended the gods as well and what she submitted. And you need to, it's quite important in this area of how people behave. That there is more to this area than what people may see in the paperwork.
Well, we're here exploring the merits of the proposal and I should play good advocate of it with the evidence. So my next question is archaeology, because you've touched on it now. And it does seem that this is a proposal that really should have an archaeology report. I think you've submitted some materials regarding archaeology. Can you take us through that and see?
That provides some background information that Mrs. Sturgis had.
What we've got is
Previous consents.
two letters here from ASL Archaeology. So do you want to take us through that material and see how that assists us with our understanding of archaeological things?
So it's probably the item 6. Yeah. And shows archaeological sites on strip. There we go.
So this is recorded sites.
Yes, that's the
But-
recorded database. Yeah. That's from Doc. Semi legal. And that was very similar to what used to be in the FNDC maps, except the locations
So this,
are more accurate as to where they are.
so this is a recording of known archaeological sites using publicly available information.
I believe so. That's correct.
Yeah.
I think.
I suppose the question is, has there been an on-site archaeological?
Yes, Hans walked over all these sites. I think he writes it in those reports. And Hans subsequently to coming up in the north been used quite a lot on other sites. And,
Is this where he says recorded sites were revisited and a survey over accessible maps on the property were undertaken?
and
A number of recorded sites could not be located. But this looks like evidence regarding recorded sites. I suppose my question is, what about those sites that may be there that haven't been?
if you have a look at that, you see a lot of the areas. You see the big white areas in it? Yes. All this land has been forested in the past, and most of it has then been turned back into pasture. So it's been heavily tilled and turned over in the process of turning it back into this. So the areas that are still in bush, and the bush originally was pretty much zero 30 years ago on these sites because they were all burned every year. That was the way that. So the bush that's returned now is much more mature than it was ever allowed to be in the past. So I think the general feeling the archaeologists have is that why is there no activity behind it related to the water that was there and the fact that it's not renewable. And that's the general reason that they would come over on this boat. That's that little landing spot that you see up in that corner there. And then they would walk up and they obviously had it up on the hill. That was a signal people. Right? And then the key areas elsewhere that was potentially a different age group of people doing things that are related. That's something we've been pushing Heritage New Zealand to, that only they can. We have a permit to.
Mr. Sturgis, you're seeking the rezoning of this land. It's up to you to demonstrate to us.
There's no evidence of anything in the area that we're seeking rezoning
And
over.
that's based on what?
On
That's
this,
your opinion?
no, just based on what Cam Hans's walk over the property. He walked over the whole lot. And had a good look, so
As I said before, what I read in that letter is that he's walked over and investigated the identified site. My question is, usually when we have situations like this, a fresh archaeological assessment in detail is done. They note the recorded sites that are there. I've gone over the sites and I couldn't find anything else. I don't think that's what it means.
there's plenty of people walked over these sites in the past. That will send you all the reports. It's been an area of a lot of interest in the past, particularly in the 80s and 90s. And these sites here is the compilation of everything that's been identified. So it's not that area, and I agree that it does need to be looked over before anyone goes and commences any further work. And we're very interested to hear anything that we can add to it, or anyone that neither knows. Neither was the housekeeper on this property for many years, or a caregiver, and so she does know it quite well historically, and she will have heard stories from others. So it would be lovely to have your input.
Have you had any conference with Heritage New Zealand?
A lot. I was just talking to them 2 days ago about which direction to take, and
Have they provided you with anything tangible that you could present to assist?
as I said, the key thing there was Google. They put the thing to say that they supported us in our endeavours. That's what they're prepared to say at the moment. There's a lot of reasons why they choose to do that. We're just the adjoining land. Like, we have responsibilities under the Conservation Act, how we have to support, and particularly in this position in support EU, right? And it's not there at this stage anyone's desire to do anything more than what nature prevents. Remember, the items that are coming out are only coming out because of the erosion of the dunes. That's our concern as farmers alone, because our fences have to keep moving back to isolate it because they get buried under the sand. But also just the fact that those ecological areas are often at the back of the dunes. That's the old bog swamp, and they're getting filled in the sand as well. So we're all on the same set of drivers. We're there for different reasons. And, you know, these things are working out. We are getting along quite well. You get fresh people coming in from Shortland Street who, you know, have an opinion on something. But at the end of the day, if you read what he says, he said, it's my understanding. And often some of the points in the book, legal letters, they always be careful when they write, it's my understanding. It's basically a license to say anything.
We've got lawyers from High Street in Auckland as well
Yeah.
as Shortland Street. Look at that.
High Street was it? No, they moved. They were always, they were my lawyers, so I know Bankside quite well. So
Fine.
I think they are in the top of High and Short. It's that top of.
I don't know where they are.
I've got a supplementary question to that, because we've just heard that the zoning request was moved away, the areas to be rezoned was moved away from potential archaeological sites and potential sites of significance to Māori, even though we haven't got a cultural impact assessment. Item 6 here, it shows the headland there, and Mr. Sturgis there has just said how the waka would come up with the brown boxes essentially to the par site on the end. And there's a number of midden areas and artifacts, and also it's got a little triangle that says artifact find. I mean, I guess I'm asking that because the rezoning you've said was moved away, but that whole headland is proposed to be rezoned as rural lifestyle zone. And under this, and also in terms of recognising and providing for ancestral lands, water sites, wahitapu and other taonga, how is the proposed rezoning going to do that, given that it's got all of that there on that headland that's proposed to be rezoned? I see that the other area along the beach is not, it's still proposed to be rural production zone,
Yeah.
but the headland itself is still proposed to be rezoned.
So the subdivision provisions themselves actually have. So, and you've also got provisions for historic heritage. As well. So as a plan framework as a whole is better.
I think the one thing to note is that in the area of our neighbours, right? We obviously they'll wait to see how things go and then they'll join them, but they did just recently subdivide those blocks. I think in 2020 was the last, and there was an assessment done on that I can afford a copy if you'd like, and that talks about what was happening on that land. So I think what's on record with the district council for those blocks is possibly something that we can go looking for. And on our blocks, we had to recently do house consents. The council said that we didn't have the right consents after we bought these properties, and we got abatement notices, and then we got notices to fix, and then we got notices to stop. But after about 2 or 3 years, we finally got code acceptance or something on them, and there was for that separate investigations on the area there, and a lot of the middens that you see are actually from the gum digging days. And shells are quite recent because there was a lot of gum digging activity going on out here at the time. So the key area is items that were buried potentially fairly deeply in the sand, but then becoming exposed for various reasons, and that you don't know where they're going to be. But we have noticed in recent, and we do update the responsibility, the whole dune area that they own. We have dune areas that we're going to farm, and whenever we see a new midden arising, and there has been a couple recently, we write them and they go and have a look at it. So they're probably doing their own ecological work.
And just to respond from the planning point of view, so even for control activity subdivision, matters of control put the extended potential effects on sites and areas of significance to other ancestral planning on sites like so there's a process available within the zoning subdivision requirements to take into account those matters, and that's certainly an area where a detailed archaeological assessment would be
I was just going to get the applicant to introduce the other witnesses, but have you got a question or clarification on something that's just been asked now?
Just clarification on Commissioner Boyd's question, if that's all right. If it just to be clear, what I heard, that the reliance in terms of managing these matters with the headland and other parts of the site, the reliance is on the PDP chapters as opposed to the provisions in the development area chapter. So is that?
That was the tone I was hearing. So could you clarify that, Mr. Langford?
That's correct. It's a combination of both. So it's a combination of both the existing provisions, which talks about that impact on the archaeological sites. There's the additional control provided through the development area provisions, which actually seeks engagement prior to the see.
Yes.
To actually ensure that.
So what I was, no, thank you very much. And where I'd like to take the evidence now, I think obviously we want to hear from the other experts, because I'm sure that they will add to some of the questions that we've already asked. But also too is obviously you're wearing two hats, Mr. Langman. You're sort of running the case for the applicant as the sort of default advocate, but you've got expert evidence as a planner, are you wanting to make a separate planning statement summary as well as a witness, or
no,
was your introductory statement your planning summary as well?
That's correct. That's correct. So that's
So what I think I would like to do is hear to some statements from the other witnesses, and then perhaps come back to you, and perhaps you can take us through the development plan provisions that you have you prepared, maybe, and then take us through again that question where you're relying on the PDP plan provisions and where you have some additional provisions in your development plan. Certainly address some of these issues. And in particular, we're looking at the triggers and mechanisms for the activities that you propose and how the development area trigger the levels of assessment that you think, well, you say that has occurred. So you happy with that approach?
Yes, sir.
Panel? Right, so I'll let you call your other witnesses in the audio to prefer.
Mr. Sol. We can get that. We might have to get Mr. Sol back.
Let
yes, sorry.
Sol go first, and he can go back to his conference.
Yes, yeah.
Mr.
We don't
Sol
want him
had
to
another
miss-
meeting to go to.
Didn't want him to miss
Yeah.
the lunch.
He put that in the chat.
Yeah, that's cool. That's probably,
Mr. Sol's gone then.
probably best to hear from Bridget.
I don't think we had many questions for Mr. Sol, if any, did we? So I think we're allowed to let him, he can, even though he's gone, I think we. So who would like to go next, Ms. Gilbert?
Wastewater.
Yes, infrastructure.
Kia ora, Mr. Chair, Commissioners. So I might start with just taking you through my statement, which I think you have a copy of. My name is Bridget Gilbert, and my qualifications and experience are set out in my evidence in chief. In my evidence in chief, I identify the key landscape-related tests for zoning. I then identify and evaluate the existing landscape values and natural character values of the site and the area. And this is followed by investigating the rezoning strategy to ensure that it aligns with the identified landscape tests as they relate to the existing landscape and natural character values of the site and local area. This part of my assessment culminates in the development of the Pūheki Preliminary Spatial Strategy, which demonstrates how the proposed rezoning could be successfully absorbed into the local landscape from a landscape effects perspective. I have read Ms. Malene Absalom's report and understand Ms. Absalom to be generally supportive of the development anticipated by the spatial strategy. However, Ms. Absalom is unable to support the submission due to the difference between the land sought for development under the spatial strategy and the rezoning pattern sought in the original submission. Put another way, it is my understanding that Ms. Absalom is unable to support the rezoning proposal in its current form, given that there is no mechanism proposed through the rezoning request to ensure that the master plan will be implemented. Mr. Langman's rebuttal evidence addresses this disconnect, recommending the introduction of a Pūheki development area chapter into the plan that includes an amended version of the spatial strategy and a location-specific suite of objectives, policies, rules and standards, including a requirement to take into account Mātauranga Māori principles, and that's an objective 2 in policy 4, and for buildings and structures to have a visually recessive colour palette, and that's via standard 1. Overall, it is my opinion that the layout, scale and character of development anticipated by the Pūheki Development Area Chapter will ensure development aligns with the key landscape-related policy tests that I referenced in my evidence in chief and is appropriate from a landscape and natural character effects perspective. I have also listened to the submissions presented in relation to the Laclaw rezoning on day 2 of the hearing, which was Tuesday. I have reviewed the archaeological assessment work undertaken on the Laclaw land that has been done over the years by Dr. Hans Dieter Bader and the archaeological site mapping prepared by the Department of Conservation for the Pūheki Marginal Strip. I confirm that the archaeological sites identified in that work are located away from the main areas proposed to be developed under the Pūheki Development Area as advised in my evidence in chief. And now I'd like to sort of expand on things in response to the discussion that's just been going on. So firstly, I think it was Commissioner Foy sort of talking about if you like, seeking a bit of clarification on what I guess this collective team perceive as the benefit of the objective and policy framework relating to Mātauranga Māori principles. And I guess in my experience, how that plays out as a landscape architect, and I've got in mind a recent rezoning in Pokeno, which has followed through into a subdivision resource consent process. And in that instance, iwi and Ngāti Tamaoho, who are mana whenua, and they have the piece of land in question, it actually doesn't particularly have sites of significance in the normal way that they would be identified in the district plan. However, it has got very important connections, spiritual connections, and articulating that in a reason can be extremely difficult. How it's played out through the resource consent process is that we have been extremely involved of species and are actually all of the plant material for quite an extensive area is being grown by iwi. So it's, in that sense, the resource consent process has led to a far deeper relationship, both between the developer and iwi, and also an ongoing relationship between iwi and the land that is embedded in the development. I guess my experience is that takes time, and the mandatory, as I understand it, requirement to that is introduced by the land provision signals the importance of that, the critical importance of that to any development in this area being appropriate because of that dimension of landscape values. I can only speak as a landscape architect. I'm not a cultural landscape expert. Another example that springs to mind, and I suspect Ms. Absalom is aware of this one, and it's the shared walkway, shared path across Hobson Bay in Auckland. And that was a resource consent process which allowed extensive engagement with iwi and the consideration of tauranga principles in the design and the development. And that's coming through in subdivision design now as quite a common thread. And it resulted in a far deeper, if you like, cultural narrative in the what will be the built outcome, than simply saying this is a site of significance or a place of significance and will recommend. So that's what I understand to be the benefit of that particular policy framework. Then picking up on the query from Commissioner Foy regarding the sites in the what I'll call the neighbouring land on the western side of the headland, my understanding is that area has been subject to recent subdivision consents, as I think Mr. Sturgis mentioned, and that the lot sizes are around averaging about 9 hectares. But there are, as I understand it, there are 3 platforms identified. So that's what I'm advised. So while they haven't been subdivided, as I understand it, down to that density, the density of residential development accords with a rural lifestyle zoning. So it's almost like making sense of an existing density zoning provision.
Do we have a copy of that subdivision?
Yes, I can provide one tonight. Yes.
So I would hope that the existing sites on that part of the headland that are shown as being recommended for rezoning, those have been taken into account in the subdivision processes that have gone on to date. And consenting processes, should I say.
Would be helpful to get a copy of that decision in the section 95 report? For that subdivision? For the subdivision that's been referred to, a copy of the decision in the section 95 report?
Can we just provide a copy?
Yes, it's online. It's actually.
Sorry, just as a point of clarification, if I can confirm, is that subdivision consent that's being referred to, is that in the area shown on the development area plan as RLZ area A?
Yes.
Doesn't have what, sorry? Which plan are we looking at, sorry?
On the Kerikeri development area plan, there's two different sorts of hatching that are showing the rural lifestyle area to be rezoned. One is RLZ area A, which I understand to be the land that isn't owned by any of the submitters here. And it is the land that has just been clarified that that's the land that they're talking about, that a recent subdivision has been put forward on. Then you have RLZ area B, which is the area that I understand is owned by the submitters here today. And that is the area that has different rural lifestyle provisions proposed that relate to clustered development.
You're talking about the English straight line hash area?
The horizontal
Horizontal.
lines are area A, vertical
And
lines
that's
are area
subject to
B.
the discussing.
Yes.
And how many lots did you say, Ms. Gilbert?
As I understand it, it's in 3 lots, and I think there may be one additional very small lot towards the southern end that was achieved via a boundary relocation subdivision. But again, I'm advised that there are 3 platforms anticipated on each of the 3 bigger lots that are around that kind of 9 hectare.
9 here.
9, yeah. I can kind of give you the rough measurements. They are 13.8, 7.2 and 9.5.
I wonder if they had a soft impact assessment or an archaeological assessment strategy.
And so this land is to be included in the proposed rezoning also. That subdivision.
It is at this stage, and I think, so as we're in preliminary discussions, with the landowners on the sites, and they were, quite neutral. Anything advice by one of the in stage, that he does wish the retain rural production zoning. I think that was partially in response to concern from the community. So, but we don't have any further correspondence from him. It's just a. Yeah, so we just need to clarify that position for those parties. Previously, in discussions with them, they were neutral on the rezoning issue.
Okay, thank you.
I hope that accurately summarised that.
We have any other questions of Ms. Gilbert? Thank you, Ms. Gilbert. I'm sure we'll be coming back to you at some stage as well. But thank you for that summary. The next witness you want to summarise for us? Anybody on the line that you covers in?
No, that's Mr. Silver's the only the best on mind, so.
So it's ecology or transport, who wants to go first?
My name is Melanie. I'm working on highlight a few things in my summary statement and answer any questions you may have. The first thing, and there's no dispute regarding this extremely high ecological values of the Kerikeri Beach, the Rezoning lakes, and the surrounds relate to insects, dunes, dune swales, dune lakes, freshwater wetlands and shrublands, and I know that some of the submitters raised this as well. And the defining feature of this ecology is that it's naturally very low in nutrients. For example, we have very low fertility acidic soils, which the remnants of former coal forests, and they give rise to a very botanically interesting peatland community dominated by America. The wetlands there are also naturally low fertility wetlands, like coastal peatlands, that are heat over many hundreds of years. And also the dune lakes are very vulnerable to nutrients because they're shallow and they don't have a lot of inflow and a lot of outflow. So nutrients can build up in these areas. So you've got unique soil and water conditions here which underlie the significance of these areas and make them sensitive and make them vulnerable to nutrients. And we also have very extensive pest management issues on this property, and that relates mostly to pest animals, but also pest plants. But we're already seeing here that there's a reduction in some of the species, but expect this area to support. And I would highlight geckos there. Mr. Sturgis paid for a survey of biodiversity on the property, and specialists were unable to find any geckos, and it's believed that's because of the impacts of pest animals. So we have a site here that's extremely vulnerable to nutrients and has some very high management needs, and I think that's why, and because of this, it's precisely why we need to look at why the submitters are looking at different options for how to manage this than farming, which in my view, conventional farming, high stocking rates and use of fertiliser is incompatible with the values of the site. So this is why we have worked through a master plan approach to the future development of this area as outlined in Mr. Langman's rebuttal evidence, which shows the locations of various activities and which will all require resource consents. And none of the outcomes are predetermined, but it does give us a comprehensive overview of the anticipated development. And there's some risks in that you can't know some of the effects until the consents are applied for. But I would say that the risks of the status quo are much higher than the risks of what has been set before you today. Because what's being proposed can be accompanied with ecological restoration, riparian planting, taking a bespoke approach to heathlands and looking at lower impact uses and taking a best practice approach to management of water, stormwater and wastewater. And that should result in benefits in dune lakes and wetlands. So that was a summary of consider to be the benefits and the reasoning for looking at a different approach to managing this area.
Okay, thank you. Any questions?
What do you see as the future of this land holding if this development proposal was not to proceed for some reason?
May I ask Mr. Sturgis to comment on that?
Oh, I think Land Court gives us a good model to it's follow their model of fence of feet. Eight fence large now. So
So what's the answer from the ecologist's point of view, please?
Yeah, I think the answer is to have an option for the owners in an economic pathway that doesn't consist of intensive farming, which we are seeing demonstrated on neighbouring property. You can look at the aerials and you can see areas that are much brighter green. Yeah, and being clearly stocked at much higher rates.
Thank you, Melanie. You said that with careful ecological management uses and careful management of stormwater and wastewater, see an ecological advantage. My question is, given you also said dune lakes are vulnerable to nutrient and stormwater inflows, what's the impact of the development of the areas? Was it going to be RLZB? I think we ended up deciding it was. Stormwater, effluent, or you're going to have effluent ponds, so you're going to have greater loading, stormwater. How you going to manage all that without getting into your ecological area? Oh, question for you.
Sorry, I will only cover this in the surface, and if there's some detailed questions, I'll get Mr. Blythe to provide you with a more fulsome response. My understanding is that any of the development is an actual policy relating to best practice water management, which would require any of the new wastewater, whether it's for an individual lot or a new system, to be at absolute best practice standards. And you can compare that to stock, which obviously the effluent from stock has no treatment. There's no requirement for it to be treated. So
The reason I asked about that, sewage plant is, at one stage there was some suggestion that there was overflows or outflows that headed off to the east and down into that area. So when you intensify the development up on the headland, we're going to have both increased stormwater and effluent. So that's my question, and I'm happy for Mr. Sturgis to answer it. But I just wonder if you considered that in your commentary.
The fuller land is towards the main lake, so it's certainly something that has to be done to make sure that the wastewater treatment is practiced properly.
Actually, the all actually going to the stream to the side.
Yes, that's right, it
Rather
does.
than the lake itself. So
So it doesn't impact the lake, stream doesn't get to the lake.
yeah, so it's a small catch. I think it's the evidence of supply.
Yeah.
It's a small portion which actually very small portion which does affect the lake. Main surface would go to the solution.
No, that's fine. Thank you.
Half questions for Mr. Sturgis and you. Mr. Sturgis, I recall you being presenting evidence to us at hearing number 4 over a year ago, regarding beach vehicles on beach. That was your evidence. Yes, yeah, you raised significant concerns about uncontrolled vehicle access of 4-wheel drives, or can have side-by-sides and onto beaches, and disturbing the ecology of the beach. Is it?
Well, it's
And I think you were asking.
It's a fairly simple one, because I know there's been a report written by the council, which I think has and maybe we can listen, you could answer for that, but the report misses the point at Pufeki Beach. Pufeki already has a VEZ on it that the regional council has decided, as does Rangiputa Beach has a VEZ, and it's because this concept that whole area has to go back to being a bird sanctuary. Taken Waiwango Swamp was specifically set aside by Carrington in his submission. And that is an area now that's coming ahead again. Right? It's working back to the other lakes. We're all working on that. We're working with Parliament, Bangkok to improve ours. And then it's the main issue is not only the marine bird life in Raohunu Harbour, but it's the migrating birds that come through on their way to the main Sounds, that area. They rely on that area there to have their pit stop, mainly leaving. You see them on the beach when there's suddenly a flock of terns turn up. And so being able to provide a safe and reliable place for them helps these animals. So, and we have commitments to do that. So that's where we're headed to with that. And the issue that's key to this though is, and it's this whole boundary issue, and we'll come to that in the last hearing. It's this ONC boundary issue that was left for the last tidy up hearing at the last one, and it has all come down to where is the boundary between the regional council and the district council, and where is the dock boundary, and it's actually all comes about because of the GIS file that gets created.
I don't want to go into the details of that because we'll be doing that later. I just wanted to just to clarify that you've got concerns about the ecological effects of vehicle access on the beaches, and that's associated with all of that integrated sort of bird sanctuary, wildlife protection, which I provided an excellent summary.
Yes, we're trying to.
So I'm going to turn this into a question for Ms. Dixon now. I'm not going to, well, I'm trying to shut you down because I think you've given me the answer I was after.
Thank you.
Ms. Dixon, obviously you agree with Mr. Sturge's summary there that you've got this high value bird habitat there, interrelationship between the foreshore and the lake. I'm just wondering, from an ecological perspective, obviously if this development plan proposal proceeds, there will be increased activity, human activity in all of these areas. From an ecological point of view, do you have concerns about that? And how do you suggest from an ecological perspective that the adverse effects that are of greater significance are first avoided and then otherwise remedied or mitigated? I know that sounds like a big question, but you able to give us some guidance on that?
Yeah, I think so. If we start at the beach, the activity is currently very high. I've been there when the tides rise to harvest tours, and it's like a car park.
It's tours that are bringing the trucks to the yard.
Yeah. So yes, there is.
I'm just going to write some notes down as you keep.
Yeah. So there would be a transition from grazing to activities such as glamping between some of those, between that's what's proposed between the lakes and the beach, and that does have some benefits in terms of you won't have the stock pressure on the trampolines and the things that are education. So there's some benefits. But yes, there is an increase. There is an increase in activity, and I think it would have to be carefully managed. And I think that's what we're talking about. That's what I'm referring to with as the risks, but also the framework. The detailed framework that's set out in Mr. Langdon's rebuttal evidence. I think that gives us a pathway to work through these things. And I would insist and ultimately we have some legal protection for some of the values which would be tied with requirements to do pest control and things like that. And there will be some effects, but we need to work through those and come up with the proposal list.
So I suppose in some senses you'll be replacing the risk of stock damage to bird life with the potential risk of human damage to bird life. And obviously that would be access. If the glamping is immediately behind the church, I understand that's where it's supposed to be.
John, I respond to that.
Yeah.
It's just a broad area indicated I think you're doing a site visit tomorrow and you'll
Well,
see
you
that
are
there's,
definitely doing a site visit.
yeah, there's some,
Was it all the stuff?
that there's definitely more sensitive, like,
Is it, I'll do some broad sort of gesticulating. We're talking sort of this area immediately behind the dunes.
yes, that's right, and.
That's where the cycling is going to be as
No,
No, no,
no, the cycling,
well. Down here,
the cycling is through this area.
so glamping generally, and I assume it's at reasonably low rates. Have you indicated an intensity?
There is already gates that exist that used to be used to access the farm from the beach along that boundary, and we've shut off those 4 gates since we've owned it. We've managed to now, we can't get through in the middle of winter, parts of the farm, but we've kept off the beach as a result. And obviously, it's like the question about infrastructure. Like, there
No,
is,
I want to keep the questions on ecology, actually.
but it's the same one, you have to have, this is the target, that's where you have to be. And if it's only one glamping site, then that's all you're allowed. So you have to always meet your targets, and similarly damage to the dunes. It's all a matter of how much money you spend on infrastructure. If you want no damage to the dunes, then you have to put walkways in and you have to walk above it, assuming that does help. But all I'm saying is the way forward is the vision of what you're trying to achieve, and way forward is the same. That's, you actually, to be able to afford the infrastructure, it's a dynamic thing. You actually need more humans there to spread the cost over. And then you have to build something that is capable of not doing any damage to the environment. But it's not a closed loop system. It can't be that. It's not necessary. But you do need drinking water there. That's the key. You need grey water. Grey water is your biggest loss. And so you must spend more money on pipes and providers.
I'm not asking infrastructure questions, so please. I set that up because I wanted to know where the glamping was, and we had the discussion for essentially where I said we're replacing cattle with humans, and then I think you have a different risk profile with humans, and I suppose I've been involved in this previously on a very, very sensitive area involving New Zealand heritage, and at that. And I know there's no fairy tales there, but there are sort of comparatively important bird species and rare endangered bird species there that are worthy of the highest level of protection. So in that regard, from an ecological point of view, what sort of mechanisms are needed to control human behaviour? Humans being highly unpredictable, less predictable than cattle. Possibly. But what I'm really trying to say is what sort of mechanisms from an ecological point of view need to be in place to prevent human damage at night time when the glampings are close to the dune system.
I'm thinking on the fly here, because we've talked about some of the detail, but we haven't looked very important.
And I accept that these things may be appropriately addressed through a resource consent, but I think it's worthy of exploring them now, because I think it comes down to the merits of encouraging human occupation directly close to areas of significant fauna.
So one of the things I have discussed with the team would be the need to get detailed fauna advice for that particular area. So I think potentially some of the things could be that the glamping has certain times of year, certain exclusion times. Particularly, it could be, I would say, it looks like a huge area just outlined in yellow, but I think it's not, the effect's not going to be across that entire area. I wouldn't think otherwise. It wouldn't feel like a glamping experience. It would feel like a campground. And other things of importance is how you manage people getting from that area to the beach, and just thinking about the creating access points on sort of along the islands, not having people. There's obviously more than one reason for this area to be careful to where people growth. But I just checked what detail I had in my evidence and treatment on this, and I don't have a lot, but I would see that there are ways to address human disturbance. Things that can be put in place, whereas I mean, I would view the risks of that as less than cattle roaming through those areas.
So would you favour things such as identified beach access pathways and management rules to require those people occupying those areas to use only those areas?
Absolutely, and I've seen that change in my lifetime of camping in various beaches. We did used to wander all over the dunes and things, and now you have roped access and sometimes have sand ladders and things. It's I think it's I'm not sure that humans are that unpredictable. I think if we provide convenience and access to where people want to go and put some interpretation as to why you're doing that.
Is it a matter of educating each camper? Here you go, here's an information booklet that tells you this is the spots where you must access the beach, and this is why. And you have to play your part, and you're here because you want to be in this wonderful environment. So therefore, if you have too much to drink, you go stumbling over the dunes. That could have catastrophic effects.
Well, yes, and I think
so. Signage, information,
all those
things like that.
All those sorts of things, and so it'd be very, very regulated. And to be able to tell you at the moment, it does have some of that. Drinking at night, unofficial camping happening through these areas.
This is the unpredictable human behaviour.
That would be the unpredictable human. That would be the unpredictable human behaviour. We have that now, and I think it would be a less attractive place to go with that sort of activity if there were people there.
So that would presume that a glamping operation would have some sort of management as part of the operation rather than being sort of passively occupied area. Obviously, if someone misbehaves, you would expect there to be a mechanism of who shuts down the behaviour that could threaten ecological values. Would you expect that?
I would hope so. I hadn't given much thought to the detail management.
Yeah. I mean, this is something you could perhaps help us with, Mr. Langman, to how you think that can be. If you can address this later.
I'm happy to know just in terms of the provisions of production type for reservoir accommodation. It's an activity where it's within a residential and accessory building or my residential. That my reading of that is that's not what's been proposed here. So your default activity status is discretionary. So the full fix ecological exits, all those sorts of things we take into. So I would hope that does occur. Potential impacts that might be management of that activity.
Is there any? I know you're going to take us through the provisions shortly, but is there any recognition for these sorts of things in your provision, and if not, should it?
The question is a fully discretionary activity. Assessment criteria for discretionary activities because if it was restricted discretionary, I would be including that. Yes, certainly.
But a development area provisions could raise that issue.
It's just a policy.
Yes, certainly policy provisions. Okay.
Yeah.
And what I was wondering is it there and actually point us to it when we get there? Or should it be there? No, thank you very much for your answers, Mr. Dixon and Mr. Sturgis. Sorry to cut you off. But you were going down an infrastructure route when I really wanted to talk about college. So, thank you. Thank you. Any more questions?
Yeah, I had questions related to Lake Rotokawa. I see there's significant opportunities for enhancement and restoration. The current plan that we were given, it shows like a hard black line around the lake. Is that a fence or what is that? Is that just a cadastral boundary? What I'm wondering about is the ecological interface between a lake, you know, a significant lake in the area, and what you've proposed as the ecologist, and how those two would interrelate, both with the management, we talked about eco-sourcing, Mātauranga and Māori specimens plants. Yeah, how would that work?
In terms of that's on the Department of Conservation land. So you're talking about what would happen in the Department of Conservation land or on this?
Is this a fence, this black line?
Yes, we fenced it about 4 years ago. I fenced it to make sure there was never, before that it had been interfaced. And we talked to Doc about it, regional council. So then it was the fences were put through to make sure that there was hard in it. It's been a good thing, but like everything, certain things have changed. And obviously, the issue we've had lately is the main people who come through into that area, there is actually no legal way into the lake, any of those lakes, except through our farmland or farmland. And so the issue has been it's improving, but there is always an issue in the hunting season when they allow duck shooters in and they give them a permit, open permit, and then for us, the issue is the fact that they only go after the ducks. If they went after the big problem, which are those Canadian geese, right, then that would really be a win for us all. But unfortunately, and also their best shooting, my mind that they put up, are where they're firing right over our land. That's where the wetlands are, and that's actually, it doesn't have ducks, but they seem to like coming in over that patch when they come onto the lake. And so there's a management issue, and we have been in discussions with the permit people, which is I've got the name, permit the hunters, and every year we're slowly improving it, and people sort of respecting our fences a little bit better coming through. But the attitude is, well, it's your problem. Our hunters can go where they want. If you're having problems, you have to get the police out there, which the police just don't have time for that sort of thing. So it's an issue that we're all working on, but there's no doubt that it needs hunters, like all these lots need hunters on them, but it has to then be managed. You know, and the way that you shoot these pests should be pest shooters, not sport shooters, because they need to be shot, and they, particularly the Canadian geese, are a real problem. They need to be addressed. So you need to have a permit that allows you in this area to operate under a different set of rules so that you can farm the wildlife, you can farm the dunes and its plant life, and you can make it improve so that your business improves and people come to enjoy it more and more, and finally it becomes economic. It's like all in farming. You have to invest to get a return, and you have to be able to manage your land. And I think we are working towards that position, and it's very hard for Pāmu to come into working with any surrounding landowner. They also have a law into themselves, but we do have contacts there, and we have cooperated on major things. They have their rules as well.
Thank you. I just wanted to hear from the ecology perspective. I'm only thinking because I've seen other lakes and other areas become statutory acknowledgement areas by the settlement as probably that farm as well. So there may be a different landowner in the future.
Yeah,
If the, as part of the settlement process that we've talked about today, and that lake may be a statutory acknowledgement area, probably a high ecological site. So in terms of ecology, how do you see that fitting into the way what you've outlined here for enhancement and restoration, how that interrelates with the lake?
well, the dark green that you can see is showing the restoration of the ephemeral and permanent waterfall going towards the lake, as well as along the side of the lakes. And you can see a lot of restoration, pest control, weed control within the vicinity of that country. The lake, there'll probably be some recreational use of the land to the west of the lake, but there's no proposal to provide any access to the lake. It's actually reasonably difficult from that side anyway, and there are some. I wouldn't encourage that either, as there's some risks with introducing pest farms to an issue for a lot of the dune lakes. Already alligator weed in this area, but there's other things you wouldn't want to be introduced. So you really want to look at that thing very carefully. But it's, so I would say mostly it's restore the margins and restore the pathways to the lake. That's the way I see the interaction between the two.
These lakes are only that deep, well, you understand. I think the maximum depth is 1 metre. So they're just a pan that holds water, and typically they're like in Kaimau that you see, they used to be largely large kamuka sitting in them, and fire's gone through in recent years, so sort of stumps. Basically, when summer comes, you see the old stumps still showing there on the pan. So as a water thing, it's very useful for birds. They love it. The main people, obviously, that like the lake are the shags, and that's where there's, I think, one of the last remaining actual rotokawels, which still has shags living in the Hurakawa tree on the southern side, and those shags are very important to the living in the harbour, and they're in the harbour thing, and they have their daily pattern where they come and go, and protection of those Hurakawa trees and all that is very important. And that's the trouble with hunters coming in without any knowledge of what's in the trees. It does have, birds die each time from just not that education. It's really, all of this is about education, and that's why we've said reserve a whole lot of land for an education centre, a variety of things.
And I think we're over to you, Mr. Scanlon. Now, thank you very much. Asked you a lot of questions, and thank you very much for this.
Those commissioners, council staff, I've circulated a summary of my evidence. I'm assuming that you've read my primary evidence, so I'll just do now my summary, if that's okay too. I'll start with paragraph 2. Overall, I'm confident that adequate access can be provided to the proposed area of rezoning, such that traffic effects of subdivision and other development enabled by the rezoning will be best defined. No impediment to the grant of associated consent applications. In particular, the traffic generation from this locality is significantly lower than that of localities close to urban centres. I found an average of fewer than 2 movements per household equivalent on an average day, and unlikely more than 4 per day during holiday periods. There are existing safety issues with the Rangiputa Road, the Mutatala Drive intersection, but at least 4 access options that would provide the adequate level of service and safety and address those issues. Those include a new access by way of an unformed road 400 metres east of Mutatala Drive, a new roundabout and or a realignment of Mutatala Drive. And figure 2 of my evidence in chief provides the diagram showing several diagrams, in fact, illustrating those. With a new access road 400 metres east of Mutatala Drive, a right turn bay and earthworks would be necessary to address site distance deficiencies. This can all be achieved within the legal road reserve. I agree with the approach suggested by the council's traffic engineer that the zone rules include provision requiring the achievement of safe site distance in relation to this new connection. The other engineer, Mr. Collins, and I had a written disagreement really about what would be a safe site distance, but I think just specifying a safe site distance allows that to be relitigated and canvassed at the time of consent applications or when the road is actually installed. The road network beyond Rangiputa is of adequate standard, even with the development enabled by the proposed rezoning, and I note that Mr. Collins is in agreement with that. All new access connections near the Rangiputa Road, Mutatala Drive intersection will necessarily encroach into the existing recreation reserve. That's a triangle that actually it's between the unformed road to the east and Mutatala Drive. Most of it's actually planted or in mostly I understand regenerating forest. But there's a triangle near Mutatala Drive that is used for boat trailer parking. It will be necessary to avoid encroachment into that area and or to ensure that motor vehicles cannot move essentially. And one of the ways to do that would be to make sure all the traffic generated in this area actually uses the unformed road, or what would become a formed road 400 metres east of Mutatala Drive. Happy to take any questions.
Yeah, thank you. I've got a couple of questions here. Did you, if you managed to have a look at or read any of the evidence from the Rangiputa residents group when they were here on? And in particular, Mr. McMillan. And I took it from his evidence that he was really concerned about the one boat ramp access that they have at Rangiputa. He says that on any day where you can launch a boat, there's usually a lot of vehicles around that. And they were concerned, and representing his resident community, that there would be really increased demand on that roading infrastructure. You got any comments for us on how that could or should be managed? And I suspect there are 2 issues. One's a genuine traffic safety issue, and another one's a sort of like a traffic amenity issue in terms of how. But it obviously needs a transportation response. Have you got any evidence that could address those concerns that's what he raised?
So yes and no. Unfortunately, I've only been I was only engaged to advise on this project a number of weeks ago, so it hasn't been during certainly hasn't been during a peak holiday period when it would be busy and I could observe what's going on. But I can say that there are 2 things with boat ramps. One is the width of the ramp itself, which determines the capacity of the ramp and how many boats can be launched in a certain time period and so on. That's generally the easier thing to deal with. I'm not saying it would be particularly easy here to widen that ramp, but the other issue is boat trailer parking. And in this case, with all the development that would be enabled by this being local, most eventual owners of property in this area could actually park their boats back at home. It would be no less convenient to do that really than to park in the official boat trailer park, which is opposite the fire station.
we got the indication that he was talking about people who are coming, wider than about 100 or 200 metres. So you had people who are coming from other parts to Kerikeri. And in particular, obviously, if we had enabled a lifestyle zone requests, potentially properties that are hundreds of metres, if not over a kilometre away, so you would expect they had both, they would probably want to use the public boat as well.
Yes, I would expect this to increase usage of the boat ramp.
Yeah.
There's no doubt.
So you mentioned widening the ramp. What traffic benefit does that provide? Does that mean two boats at a time? Something like
Two or more, yes.
Yeah,
Just
okay.
provide for more boats to be launched at one time.
But that doesn't necessarily address where they then park after they launch.
No, it doesn't. I understand there isn't much in the way of parking at the boat ramp itself.
So I suppose one of the things that we would probably need to consider is potentially increased demand, and then probably a council response to provide for where they park.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the benefit of mixed use zone, it's that type of activity that could occur logically within that, which is next to the existing overflow car parking in any case.
Yes. I think that's the number. That was his transportation concern primarily.
Yes, yeah, and that has been a commercial choice for the landowner. Providing that on the site, but it's, that is something that potentially be addressed. So I guess it's just going to depend on demand.
If I can chip in on that, it's a pretty problem really with areas like this, in coastal areas that they become very busy during holiday periods, and as traffic engineers, we're always grappling with, well, to what extent do we design for the absolute peak, or even an average peak over a short period of time, rather than, for example, the average over the entire holiday period, or even a longer period. In this case, I actually looked at the aerial photography in both Google Earth and from LINS, and not a single one of those aerial photographs showed a single vehicle parked in the current boat ramp parking area. It indicates to me that the pressure only comes on for a very short period of time. So the question is, well, should that entire demand be designed for, or do we need to be a little bit more clear about it? Or do we just let the users of the boat ramp find their own way? And I would suggest that if there's pressure, significant pressure on the parking area, that residents of this area would simply go and park the boat trailers back at home again.
Can I say?
Okay.
Because there's no other boat launching facilities than apart from the Happy Bay, a lot of people come in, launch their boats, so that's what we've heard. Submitted. Is the landowner offering any land to the public to have boat parking as part of the proposal for public use?
Yeah, I think for us, it's a very interesting proposition. I mean, the issue to understand though at Rangiputa is that the information is here in the submissions. If you choose to go through what's happened down there, happy to take you through that if you'd like. But that's said and done. If you put a caveat on that all new houses that get built in the new subdivisions had to have the boats with the wheels built into them, which more and more Rangiputa people are using, and that somehow or other we can have a way that they are allowed to use the roadways, which is what they're doing now, but whether it's legal, then potentially all the locals will just turn to that way of launching their boats, which is, or you build a trailer for others who don't, that just takes care of that part
and a forklift that lifts it on. So there's lots of ways you can get them to actually, again, it's investment in infrastructure to make use of what's there, even with, it's the rock wall issue that is actually what creates the issue nowadays. And even if we just let that rest and we just build from there, there is solutions to that. I've seen in many other places in the world. And I would imagine if you're trying to go for people from this area or others, that they may decide they want to leave their boat permanently so that they can just come and someone says to store it and then have a tractor or something that launches it for them that they rent. And that's then a solution for them, because it's very difficult with a vehicle to actually launch a crane from the beach. It's only a particular route that you can make that work, typically, and particular tide that you have to manage to, whereas the tractor users, the locals and so on, have much more flexibility. So I think it's a great challenge. And, you know, we talked it through with the people from the MBIE when they came up there and talked about that, and they wrote their report. And I think, you know, that was then the options in that report that they made, boat ramps in Far North. And you know, it's an interesting one, but again, it's the management of the marine area outside then becomes much more important, how that gets managed as well. You have to then pick up the full responsibility if you're becoming a participant in that system.
So you aren't wanting to offer boat parking to the public
Sorry?
on your sites,
Yes, I think,
to council,
yeah, I think
for the public?
that's why we're saying mixed use. That was the point. Of course, it's possible. We'd much rather that than the bush reserve gets used, because that then blocks our access. That's our emergency access when they're parking in front of our gate, which they often do. So it's like managing it, these things. But in the old days, it was just less people and people got to know each other. But in the modern world, as things get more developed in the north, you just have to come up a step, but still use the old pragmatic ways of the north. That's the issue.
Can I just clarify the question? Because I'm not sure I quite understand the angle of it. You've asked a coach. Do you mean for the council to purchase
Or
a section
an offer
or
of reserves?
right? So that's a question. By that.
Applicant.
There would have to be something.
The issue would be,
It's not part of the site.
No,
there's a large area down at the back of the beach already that's available for parking. So the council's need for a reserve space is if it's a private road, it's a legal road, and it doesn't get used now for various reasons.
Well, I was that where we get out there tomorrow.
Yeah, but the concept of improving the whole launching experience and improving the whole use of the area, people who want to do that, then I think that's something that is interesting, and it's again, it's an investment one, and we're more than happy to be part to help with it.
You've got any questions?
I have a question about the one-way bridge on Inland Road. I was looking for it in your report, about the one-way bridge that you come off State Highway 10 and the whole peninsula has to cross before they get onto the peninsula.
Started in that road.
Yes, it's one lane,
Yes.
and as from your report, rezoning potentially could increase traffic,
Yes.
particularly over summer, as you said. What's your response about that one-way bridge?
Okay, well, I had the opportunity to analyse single lane bridges on a couple of occasions, one of which was on Landing Road in Kerikeri, and I found that they actually have a surprising capacity for traffic. Landing Road is probably 2 or 3 times the length of the one Landing Road, and already carries close to double the traffic that's on it. And it's the analysis that I did was in terms of a big increase in traffic from the places like Puriru Peninsula, and I struggled to find that it would, its capacity would get overwhelming. So this one on Inland Road is only about half as that. I imagine during holiday periods it would get up towards that. But in what I've seen in the analysis I've carried out, it would still be adequate.
I'm not a traffic expert, but just my observation that there are a number of single lane bridges on State Highway 1, South Island, towards the Coromandel, bridges on State Highways. So they're not, just from an observation point of view, they exist in a lot of traffic environments. They get there.
Just further on that, in terms of safety, there are good sight lines through that particular bridge. And I've also actually had the opportunity a couple of years ago to rank the single lane bridges in the region. And there are probably, I would say, a couple of dozen bridges in the region that are busier than that. Significantly busier. One of them is the Oak Island Bridge, actually, that's the busiest in the entire region. It's now been replaced with a 2-lane bridge, but it was as busy as that for a good number of years. And the other ones, I understand are not proposed to be replaced. So I'm confident that bridge can cope with the extra traffic.
My experience, and having driven it many times, is that outbound traffic isn't a problem. That's the one that has to give way. And the only issue that always arises is when you have a stream of traffic coming from the north and they don't let the traffic coming from the south have priority because they have to get off the road and there's only a certain amount of space. But most people who live there, so it's visitor times of the year and just a sign to let people know that. Let those cars come in, that head north,
Get transit to grab another parking space.
Is that the giveaway direction is southbound, so towards the road?
Yes, that's correct. Yes.
Okay, thanks. Mr. Lang, we're keen to get on to taking us through the provisions, but I've got a couple of questions that relate to your planning areas. I think it's probably just like to throw, put those to you now. In your primary statement, paragraph, where you list the effects that are relevant. I'm not going to go through them, but there's one effect that I don't see there, and that's economics, the economic effects, and particularly with regards to proposing a commercial zone. Yeah. So, have you considered the economic effects, and in particular whether there is demand for this type of zoning in the locality, or whether you're relying on justify that zoning? And I think this question sort of applies also to the lifestyle zone too. And has there been any analysis to justify that lifestyle zone that you've relied on?
With cost benefit analysis, it's probably by reach. The only thing that I probably do and a lot of development, my experience with a lot of development is that when things are built, we provide it for people, just development people.
When they will come.
That's right. Yeah. So it's in I've seen that extensively, and particularly around Christchurch, due to development, Zelwyn district, Zelwyn district, which is really kind of pushed and promoted. People have flocked to that area because housing has been built. So I kind of see it not so much a demand issue, but more of a supply issue. And that if you can supply, then people are attracted and that creates opportunities.
Did you have regard at all to Mr. McElrath's economic assessment that accompanied the 42A reports?
Yes, I reviewed those. I didn't respond to them. I mean,
Have you had read that?
yes, yeah. In terms of things like planning for growth, the MPSU that talks about providing at least sufficient supply. So it's a bit short in supply. It's not a maximum in terms of that. So I kind of think of it as not overly relevant. Growth projections are exceptionally hard to accurate. Is the example of solar industry. It's stated it's high growth, anticipated high growth rates over the last years, simply because they have provided for more growth. So hopefully this is.
That's okay. No,
It's just a general comment, which I think the economic growth stuff is helpful over a whole region, but we provide for that growth and pyramid implications, and it's going to depend on particular circumstances. You know, if Rangitoto is a particularly active PPP additional area under the PPP development plan is particularly attractive for SMT owners, then that could potentially provide growth, which
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify those aspects, and thank you for your answer there. So again, can you just take us through your, I mean, one more question to you about, I mean, you were given the opportunity to go down the precinct route, which, you know, the seal's already been broken on precincts, and so there are a number of precincts that are planned. We don't have any development areas yet, but how you've chosen that route.
Certainly. Precinct didn't quite, and you would have hopefully managed to read the attachment in terms of the guide from MFA.
Oh, no, we understand the MFP stuff. I'm just wondering about why.
Oh, yes. Yeah. The precinct things, yes, they can be multi-zone. The guidance that MFA provides in terms of precincts. It talks about areas that are subject to master plans, future things, hearing should be in the development chapter in the precinct zone. The examples that MFA used in the precincts are things like if you have a boat building yard with or boat building zone, boat building precinct. The way that precincts and development areas are provided for the actual planning standards themselves aren't particularly useful in the description because they're very similar, but the guidance certainly helps.
So your evidence is that development area approach would better implement a master plan approach to development. Yes, that's your evidence. Yeah.
Yes, and in terms of that, both the guidance talks about multi-zone approaches for both precincts and development areas. So that's the approach is but the key focus is on the master plan.
Thank you. Questions? No, I have a similar one. Okay, I want to take us through your permission.
But I've had a little bit of conversations.
I did have a wasteful question. Didn't speak.
If there's any particular question that you'd like to put forward to Mr. Sowell in the same manner as Mr. Wright, be happy with the response.
I think my question was more as well at the start. Yeah, in response to what has been proposed by law and articulation. Yeah, later.
Okay, I think we'll just, proceed. I think the nature of this question was to start, and I think we'll ask that question later on.
So in terms of I had a little bit of a think that you're talking about the concept of how the ecological values could be taken into account in relation to resource consent for historic accommodation.
What I wrote on my notes was in your policy section is
Yeah.
policy to avoid adverse effects
Yes.
and otherwise manage effects of prison accommodation on the dunes and other.
Yeah, I think
The effects of human behaviour resulting from accommodation. Happy for you to consider this and provide something in writing a little bit later.
sorry.
Happy for you to consider this. I mean, write a policy on the fly.
Yeah, look, I was just having a look at moral productions and provisions anyway, which is where they're. So the already approach where it talks about managing land use and subdivisions and private resource consent to address any adverse effect on historic heritage, cultural, natural landscapes or indigenous biodiversity. So there is a policy framework which enables that consideration of aspects of biodiversity. Aspects within the rural production zone, which I understand. I think possibly assistance to that in terms of incorporating Māori knowledge. So you've got the original layout, potentially drawing some of that information, which can assist with the management. You mentioned ecological values, but there's also the cultural values. Potentially around gene systems, things like that as well. So that can assist in forming resource consent the general approach in terms of the development area provisions is that they apply in addition to the zone underlying zone provisions. So they act as an zone. And based on four objectives and policies which are in addition to the objectives and policies of the zones. So hopefully that's reasonably clear. This isn't a zone in itself. It's not a special zone in itself. It's an overlay, effectively over the existing zones.
So how would intensity on visitor accommodation be managed? Is that managed through a trigger of development area provisions, or would you rely on the underlying zoning?
On the underlying zoning. So the rules on the underlying zoning basically say that visitor accommodation, you must be within the existing dwelling, accessory building or minor unit, and that there's a maximum of 10 guests per night. So if you don't meet those permitted standards, you're fully discretionary.
And glamping would be considered.
Sorry,
The glamping, camping and glamping, would be considered the same activity?
I would say that it's probably not an accessory building to the primary activity on the site. It's not a residential unit and it's not a minor residential unit.
So it's visitor accommodation?
Visitor accommodation it would be visitor accommodation is discretionary.
Okay. Thank you. Any questions?
I still struggle a little with the idea of the what you're promoting as opposed to a precedent. I want to just factor through that again, because
even your responses to the chair's questions just now indicate to me that precinct might be a better approach. I just feel going back to the base zoning like rural production doesn't seem to me to be such a good idea in terms of the evidence we've heard, because some of those provisions are quite generic. So we're looking at, you know, if there was to be a special zoning, provisions being quite specific to it, and some of those matters that you're talking about, you know, visitor accommodation in a coastal location, you know, that's specific provisions, you know, specific activities that you'd expect in a special zone or a precinct to have specific provisions relating to them.
Yes, there is no specific provision in the development area provisions for visitor accommodation. It's already provided for in the underlying zoning. It's the same recreation activities, it's the same potential for so any of that, and it's a sequence and all those require a reasonable expression. So
So is it how the lodge facility, and this out on the point, you've got a lodge facility or a visitor accommodation facility.
indicated, that's right, and that would require.
That would be discretionary.
Yes, unless it would be provided for as a permitted activity. Yes. But that falls under the zone rules, not the development area provision.
And that visitor centre is still, we have quite a lot of talk with our contacts. Local hub research process that is on that, how it's done and how it's built, and all sorts of things that we like to make sure that within reason is totally agreed. There's a whole issue there from DOC's perspective and from iwi's perspective of how the area is managed, because the original plan for the reserve was then modified by the district council, putting in the extra piece of road about 20 years ago, 25, no, it's more than that, it's 40 years ago. And then created the whole change in the area. And things, yeah, that's the original plan that the developers had when they sliced off the blocks. They actually have had. Thanks.
There's sorry, I'll just clarify that. Provided a discussion on scope in my actual I've since had a conversation with Ms. Pearson around some of those activities that are indicated in the master plan, consent, which is the visitor centre. That's the clean thing. There's probably a question about, does that fairly fall within question submission? And my evidence said that, well, I thought it did because it fell within the heading of having a master plan. And I guess what we wanted to do was be clear about what was anticipated. Even though all of those activities,
I don't think that there's a scope issue. I think you're right. You proposed a master plan.
yes,
And we're just asking the questions that best needed to implement that time. Unless there's a compelling opinion on that, certainly our question at this point in time. That's obviously what I just review, but we'll hear that later.
is there anything else? Sorry,
I think
sorry.
there's another question from, we want to make another statement first?
Just on the couple of the issues that were raised in terms of from the further submitters, just in terms of built development. So we were considering there are provisions for controls. That's particularly from a visual perspective, and from a landscape perspective, that's something that helps significantly mitigate visual effects.
In terms of your planning evidence and the master plan, I also wanted to ask you about the tangata whenua chapter of the plan and which chapters of the plan you're looking at reliance on, given we haven't got a cultural impact assessment, we haven't got a detailed on-site archaeological. Is it the master plan or is it the tangata whenua chapter, and what are those provisions that would recognise and provide for tangata whenua in there and recognising section 6E of the Act in terms of this proposal?
So any subdivision of land use, like I outlined that earlier in terms of clustering, the provisions do provide for that and the policies require that. And taking into design, subdivisions like the estimation activities, but then taking the manner that incorporates and takes into account, or takes into account and incorporates. So the anticipated outcome is that those recommendations are had as part of those subdivision land use activities. That all road positioning, would be what restoration activities are taking, captions, which species, consideration of known cover, and things like that. So consideration of known so all of those aspects can be addressed at that subdivision stage. And
I had questions about that because you've been asking for zoning, so for example, opposite Kerikeri, if that's proposed to be rezoned coastal limestone, but without knowing if there's any development limitations, for the rezoning, there's quite a bit of information about site suitability for those two aspects to know. Could that be rezoned? Are there going to be limitations brought up in these two aspects at the time?
yeah, so the plan, so the district plan, subdivision provisions, seek to provide that basically say that the subdivision to address the effects of the activity requiring consent. The consideration relevant to the application includes any historic, spiritual, or cultural associations held by tangata whenua with regard to that set out in policy. It's any aspects of historic heritage and cultural values, natural features and landscapes, natural character. So there's the ability for all of those matters to address the subdivision activity. And it's similar in the land use as well.
Thank you very much. Have we got any questions or clarification from council officers? I'd be surprised if there were. Who would like to offer a question?
I might start, Mr. Chair, because I think my first point of clarification is directly relevant to Commissioner Foy's question just then. To be clear, I think Commissioner Foy is talking about the area of light blue in the very extreme eastern end of the rezoning. Oh, this area of light blue on the end there. So on this development area plan, that's not indicated to be rezoned. That's indicated to be remainder of reduction zone.
Okay.
However, the development area plan is signalling ahead of the resource consent process that is an area that is set aside for a future resource consent process. That one is a management plan, future management plan subdivision. So the intent of the development area is to signal which part of the subdivision chapter would be used to achieve coastal lifestyle type subdivision in that area, but it's not a rezoning. That potentially brings me to one of the, yeah, so there's, I guess,
That's my understanding as well.
that's my understanding.
Is coastal lifestyle living development a thing in the proposed plan, or is it?
It's not a terminology used, Mr. Chair.
Have a little operative plan to me.
It is a little operative plan-esque speak.
Operative plan is a term.
But that sort of brings me to one of the key issues, and which I'd potentially like to hear comment on, clarification on, is by using the development area to signal ahead of future resource consent processes that these sorts of things, the glamping, the education centre, we've got the lodge. There's a lodge and visitor accommodation on the headland that we were talking about earlier. There's quite a few things here where the actual provisions of the chapter don't address all the really sort of signal. There's mentions a bit in the overview. There's some high level references to visitor accommodation and tourism activities in the provisions. My concern is that the development area effectively preempts those consent processes to a point where a consenting planner would look at the development area and assume that in principle, whether these activities are appropriate had been discussed right now at the stage of including it in the plan. And I'd appreciate some comment from the team just clarifying how they see that working and whether or not that's a concern for future consent processes. A consent processor would almost feel like they're in a fait of a complete situation where the plan tells them to approve these things, and that the consent process is just to iron out detail.
So I take it that your concern, like Mr. Langman and firstly clarifying, is whether identifying those activities on the development plan gives it a sort of preemptive status that they are appropriate in that area, notwithstanding that they would be subject to the underlying zone provisions to determine their appropriateness.
Absolutely. Absolutely the question.
There you go. That's the question.
Yeah. I think that's what I was starting to allude to earlier before we started. So there is a risk that's the case. I think that the point from the evidence is that it's about being very clear about what's intended by the property owner in those areas. But I also sympathise with Ms. Pearson's point of view on those, is that it may appear favourably for a processing plan if that's received. I think the point is each of those activities would be a discretionary resource consent. And maybe Ms. Pearson's recommendation that she thinks that goes outside the scope of request. Area subject to a master plan. If those were removed from the master plan, any decision, any rezone decision, I think would be sought regardless anyway. So it's, I guess it's about being open and honest about what's been sort of there. But I don't think it's a fundamental issue of those things will be.
What's the intention? The intention is that the buildings all exist already. They're now, you have the central unit there. That was a shed that would be considered this special house there, but people are disabled. It already exists. There's a series of these batches that exist down the hill that date back 40s. Right? And currently just like a dot hut like generation who left in this real Kiwi army. And some of them actually have a historic interest. One was built by an artist who lived there, and he built the house and he just painted pictures, which is now part, I think, of Whangarei art gallery relating to his work. So there's other whole aspects to that area that one can just start operating it on that basis and then build off that. And
obviously it's how glamping is, the difference between glamping and camping. You want only people there that you can completely manage. So they must come to you for food every day. That's the only way you'll manage people. So understand.
That's the most interesting definition.
So that's what glamping is opposed from camping. Right? So is that managing them with food is essentially, as farmers, we manage our cattle with food. So basically, but that's how you would have to manage it, to ensure that these sensitive areas. That's how it seems to me. And then, of course, as the business, like a lot of these lodges and things in the South Island, if they become an attractive thing in their own right, and it may be because they're attractive just purely because they're Kiwiana, who knows where the market takes you, but then you keep coming back to all of the people involved and you keep deciding which way you go. But the key for us is that there's a commercial return that reflects the value of the property as it's currently valued.
Just again, just in the interest of exploring options, but not necessarily an outcome. I'm wondering whether some of this issue could potentially be assuaged, at least partially, by the way you word those activities, potentially with the use of the word potential or possible. That might not address your concerns, Ms. Pearson, but that's thinking it's possibly one way.
Yes, yeah.
Which sort of says not fait accompli and discretionary activity.
I'm completely happy with that. Certainly, there wasn't the intention to better council's discretion to grant those activities, but more a realistic indication of what was like we could claim, which is so that type of work is to finance rather than.
Do you want to follow up questions, please?
I have follow-up questions on other aspects that I would like some clarification on, but for that, I think you can play around with words and you can add things like potential or possible, or you can put some notes in or direction into the chapter to say, you know, these are indicative potential options, all the rest of that. I guess where I'm coming from is I'm putting a consent planner hat on, and what would I do as a consent planner? When I saw a development area plan that had these things sitting in them, spatially shown, outlined, named as to what they are, and then I get a resource consent application through. And what is the plan telling me to do as a decision maker with that information? And I think a consent planner would struggle to look at it through the lens of, am I able to decline this if I'm concerned about it, when the plan has already indicated that this is the location and nature of an activity as to where it is. So I'm not sure, Mr. Chair, that playing around with additional word helps me too much in that area.
That's good. No, that's helpful feedback that we'll take into consideration.
Just given this hearing is about rezoning requests for rural, are you basically suggesting that as commissioners we focus on that plan and exclude that one?
Probably more, but I'd like to question that one on Mr. Chair for now once we've received what we have.
Now, the reason I ask it is Mr. Langman earlier on there, he referred to, I think our interpretation of it, my learned commissioners said, build it and they will come. And you referred specifically to Selwyn District. Build houses, demands there, zoning and infrastructures there. My question is, what other drivers drove that development in the Selwyn District?
Oh, there's certainly from the earthquake perspective of the earthquake, there was at that time.
So are we planning on some sort of a natural disaster? No, because I've been down there in Rolleston, and the other about Rolleston is an inland port, and so I think there's a whole lot of other issues, and I'm just concerned that's another bit of lead by the nose.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I mean, I can think about other examples. In South Island, where zoning being provided and development just it occurs.
No, that's fine. I was aiming for that there really, and I was just you're not leading us, that's what you're telling me. That's good.
Yeah. No, look, there's definitely other factors that occurred around the time of the expansion process, and as you
That's right. Back to the chair.
Okay.
Another question of clarification?
I do have another question of clarification, and this relates to the rural lifestyle zone area B and the cluster subdivision provisions that go along with that. Obviously, this whole chapter came in as rebuttal, so we didn't have the opportunity to involve discussion of these provisions in the pre-hearing meetings to try and pick how they would work. From my initial review and then discussing, we've got Elizabeth Morrison online, and we also have Ms. Absalom here, who have looked at it from a landscape perspective and an ecology perspective. And we've just got some concerns about what those provisions would look like in terms of development. In particular, there's a reference to doing one comprehensive subdivision for all of it and using 2 to 4 hectare average lot size that would also be able to include that number averaged out using a common area. And so I'd like some clarification about where those lots would end up. How many are we talking? I know the infrastructure evidence estimated 15. How small those lots actually would be, how close together those houses might be, and what that looks like. And I think Ms. Absalom's quite interested to hear that from a landscape perspective as well.
Yeah, I'll allow that question. So, Ms. Gilbert, do you want to have it first?
Sure. I'll give it a go. Yeah, so the idea is that buildings would be located in the brown areas within rural lifestyle area B. And so that's kind of following through with a clustered development approach. The building colour controls, I think, are really important. If you go back to my area, my Appendix A mapping attached to my evidence in chief, it shows there's some heat mapping of the contours, and there's also some slope analysis mapping. And the idea, again, you'll probably see this when you're on site tomorrow, is to locate that built development on an existing gently sloping area that then drops off quite steeply and is vegetated at the moment. So in terms of visibility, say from Puhiki Beach, it's over a kilometre. Plus you've got the substantial foredunes lying on the beach. So I don't think visibility in terms of from the beach is going to be a particular concern. Density wise, I haven't run off the exact area of that brown mapping. We could provide that to you to give you lot sizes, but it's definitely a clustered development strategy.
So if you think of the Columbia, which can look over past the beach, and the ones there, that would be the concept how Kevin stuff. He's a man from up in far north there. He's built on the area of our farm there at Castaway Resort, and that's the concept he has with his clusters. And so on the coast, set right in, so you hardly see them anyway. But in this case, you'll never see them from the beach because large fortune there, but they still look out. So very much the Castaway type solution where they keep them all together, and then he has the glamping as well to go with that for people who return after weddings. That's a very popular one. So Kevin Shire, is it? Yeah.
Does absolutely want to ask a sort of supplementary question?
Yes, please, if I could. And it's directly to Ms. Gilbert, through you. If you look at area
area with the vertical stripes on it.
Yes. It has that.
And you consider the amount of the area where the residential can actually be built, which is that pale pinky fawn colour. It's a very small proportion of the whole area over which vertical stripes lie. And yet the rules, oh, it's actually a policy, I think, is it at the moment? Policy 5 is suggesting that the,
So just to, so that I'm following your logic, you're saying that within area B, which is here.
Yeah.
The pinky area.
is where the
Where
houses
all
would
the-
actually be.
Right. Well, the first question I probably would want to know is how big is that?
Well,
Is that-
And using the
This
averages,
is what I'd like to come back
how many
to.
can they have?
Yeah, exactly.
So I take it your question is, if that is where all the lifestyle development is going to be, it's likely to be quite clustered.
Quite,
Clustered.
particularly if they take the whole area as the mathematical formula for working out how many they can have.
And so I think this response, you'd actually like to.
Yeah, I would like to measure the brown and see what the density would be applying the full zone area calculation. But I have actually asked Mr. Langman about this, and my understanding is there's no minimum lot size for a cluster subdivision.
Oh, sorry, yeah, that's right. So in terms of what your parents are not taking into account the balance size. No, so but one of the other aspects that I'd probably just draw your attention to is that the 6 consented dwellings already on the headland. So that total would within that development area probably and then up to I think around 32 as a discretion. But I think if anything, it's probably good.
Control it.
Likely development potential.
So that's the overall yield, but I need to check that that's comfortably going to fit in that.
So what was that?
Around
Sorry, did you
area.
mention the number?
Using 32.
32, was it?
So, well, 16 is a controlled activity.
That's right.
Yes,
Yeah.
density. And it may be that it needs a cap.
That's what I'm saying. Is that the role for a development area provision? Does that satisfy your question? Does it?
Thank you, sir. I'm interested to know whether Ms. Gilbert had the opportunity to compare the existing colour controls that are within the coastal environment chapter of the district plan against those that are being proposed as part of the development area chapter, and why, if she has, why she's chosen to go the way she has.
That's the colour palette that applies to the coastal environment overlay, and that the colour palette that you put forward is slightly different.
I can probably cover that because I wrote the provisions. Yes, it is slightly different to the coastal environment provisions. It provides for a lighter, slightly lighter greyness element for free-weighted provisions. It incorporates the Waiheke colour palette that's used very similar environment to this area in terms of accumulating village. It does allow for slightly lighter colours, but that development that palette for Waiheke is underpinned by extensive it's work by Hudson Associates.
I'm familiar with
Oh, you're familiar with that. So that was the reason for including that. If the council's preference is to recommend the coastal environment provisions, it's neither here nor there. But I just think in terms of the breadth of colour, the breadth of colours for compatible buildings, it's still supportable.
Can I put my hand up there, just jump in a little bit, because this has all been discussed quite a lot in that consent for the existing, the houses that we did just up on the hill. And there was a lot of discussion there on the colour coding. That was a lot of that notice to stop and notice to start was all over the colour scheme and what was chosen. And we actually tested quite a few out on areas of the building, and we believe we got a very good solution, and it was with blue roofs that seemed to make the difference in that aspect. But again, so that was a bright colour, but most people don't see those buildings as they stand out now.
Any further clarifications?
Like Melissa, I have concerns about a consenting planner at some point in the future. He's got two lots of colour provisions applying to the same development. Which one do they use?
Yes.
Why be different if the whole of the rest of the Far North District is quite happy with, assuming the panel is quite happy with the.
I think the question is, does it have to be your palette?
Exactly.
I think right. Yeah. Next question.
The next question brings in sort of a more ecological question. We've got development policy P2, which talks about each application for subdivision on a subdivision area. So presumably that's if it's the rural lifestyle stuff that is provided for in the chapter, but then also management plan subdivisions that might come later. The direction is to provide ecological restoration and enhancement commensurate with the number of sites created for the subdivision. There aren't, as I can see in the chapter, then follow-up direction to help somebody understand what ecological restoration would be commensurate to the number of sites created. And I also note from the development area plan that in IRLZ Area B, there are no areas indicated in dark green, which is what the development area shows you should be set aside for ecological restoration. So my question is, for a rural lifestyle site in Area B, what areas would be protected and how much? Because there's nothing signalled there.
Yes, I think the question is for Area B. If you're wanting to pursue a management plan subdivision, I think the question is you probably should be identifying where you're going to be protecting, revegetating, or otherwise planting to achieve the outcomes required by the management plan process. Yeah, there you go.
I think that, I mean, the areas shown for restoration in the plan shown within the master plan development. I guess the question for rural lifestyle zone, that's something that would need to be taken into account at the time of application for subdivision, and given that there's I guess the beneficial, the use of the balance, balance life, contributing to the subdivision, logical area would be within that area. But it talks about development inside, as opposed to overlaying. So
I suppose what I'd like to do is sort of redirect that question a little bit to Ms. Gilbert and Ms. I'm sorry, I forgot your name. Ms. Dixon, thank you, sorry. Are you confident that there are sufficient areas within Area B to undertake a management plan subdivision and achieve those outcomes? Or have you undertaken it? Yes.
Okay, so I think this might be a problem with the graphic. In that we've identified A in kind of where the bike path is indicated, and also in other parts of the development area, particularly along the southern side, if you like, of the forges. That's keyed in as Manukau, Kanuka and farm operations integrating peatland management. And my understanding of that was very much working in with Ms. Dixon's advice around the particularities, the values associated with that heathland. And so that would be how that restoration strategy would be delivered in the RLZB part of the site. And the difficulty is we've used A, but we should actually have a green cover, the sort of mid-green, I'll call it, as part of that graphic element. Because that's the intention.
So mid-green,
That's where the good stuff is.
that the mid-green is where you would be doing your management plan planting.
Yes, it's ongoing management, as I understand it. Dimension.
So just a point of clarification, that in area B, that's not the area indicated for a management plan subdivision. That would just be straight rural lifestyle subdivision as per the provisions in the development area change.
So just to be clear, I'm suggesting that all of the sort of mid-green through area B would be where the focus of that ongoing management strategy kick in.
So through the chair, can I confirm that the strategy is that that area would perform a dual function? It would be a mountain bike park and a zip line, and also simultaneously a form of restoration to justify.
I was going to ask that question because I thought that's where, but having said that, is that your intention that the mountain biking be also part of restoration? Are they compatible?
Historically, that area, looking on the map, basically, and it's the Luckwell Farm area and a little bit, that whole area has been in farmed manuka, and it has had behind windbreaks, and it was originally set up to be windbreaks all the way through. And then they planted at one time a specific IU manuka tea tree in the area. And we've been trying to get it back to the old original manuka bits. And that's why you'll see that area worked over. It is coming back a lot better through that, but in that whole area, that was always running tracks originally. If you look at the old maps, you'll see the tracks through it. And there's nothing, it is a very nice experience walking in that land where you have manuka close on a hot summer's day and you have the quail coming through, and it's the smell of it. And running in it is very popular. You know, mountain bike parks are what the experts say is what people
I think
like.
the quick question was it meant to be a dual, was it meant to perform two functions? One was to enable active recreation from the blind mountain bike park, but also to be managed restoration, replanting, and ecological management. And I think your answer is yes.
Yes, yeah, and to expand on that, the particular vegetation type that's here, it requires some form of disturbance to have the highest ecological and botanical values. Its persistence in the landscape as relates to the fires that have occurred several times. And you'll often find you'll have more diversity on the side of tracks on these areas. So it really needs a bespoke approach. I'd be very careful about planting in this area. I think we're looking more at weed control, pest control, and really thinking about exactly where the pathways go and how this area is managed. So the real strategic approach to how the weed control is done. So it differs from a lot of other forests where I would be more concerned about pathways and edge effects and the like. This is an ecosystem that is edgy, and so it is compatible with some of this with recreation.
Not for trucks. Yeah, a bit of vegetation.
Trucks might be too. You might be a step too.
Yeah, no, it's all right.
Four-wheel.
It's probably time for a break.
Look, I really want to wrap up these clarifications.
I think I'll stop there.
just a point of clarification in terms of Ms Gilbert's comment about the graphics not being helpful. Is it, as
I mean,
I,
it's sort of,
as I now
it
think,
seems confusing me as it says area A there, but it's B.
the dark group, sorry,
The A relates to A in the key on the right-hand column, if you like, of the key.
Yeah, that's right. This keeps distracting me from listening to that. Anyway, let's have some.
sorry. Having looked more carefully at the key for the development area plan, it appears to me that the dark green is only associated with wet bits. So it's riparian and wetland enhancements. So that we need another graphic rather than the dark green that's telling us this is an area that isn't particularly wet, but we are going to restore it. Is that what Ms Gilbert thinks?
You were talking about green. There's a lot of greens here.
Yeah, there is. Through you, Mr Chair. I think we have to be careful on language here because most of that, it's not a restoration strategy, it's an ongoing management strategy of existing vegetation. And that's what needs to be clarified. So it's taking up, building on Ms Dixon's advice that this is actually quite a special vegetation typology, this heathland, and that's what we see as being the a really integral part of the rural lifestyle subdivision, and that part of the site being acceptable. The ongoing management in perpetuity, I would imagine it's not like restoration of new planting.
Yeah, there's a giant Kanuka that is a sandy Kanuka that gets very big, and it's that plant there that will propagate under the right conditions, as long as it's given a little bit of help. Obviously, nature used to do it with fire. I guess it took care of it. Somehow or other, we've got to manage it now without lighting fire. Get it back to the main gully in here, which is sort of what we're trying to retain. It's pretty much untouched. It's still quite good as it is. I don't know whether it's giant Kanukas, but it might be something else as well. I'm not an expert, but I do know that's one gully that's been left alone for a long time. And if there's anywhere these orchids are going to be, I've never seen them, it'll be in there.
You see a lot of big all the way down the west coast, north and south again.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I was going to try and pull things back together again. This is do you have any further questions? No. Thank you. Thank you. I think we've had a lot of evidence. I'd like to just wrap things up. Yeah. Thank you very much for your presentation. We've put some pretty important questions to you. I hope you understand that that's us wanting to genuinely test the evidence, and also articulate some of the issues that have been delivered through other evidence presented to us on Tuesday. So we're doing it in that context. So thank you very much for your presentation and the further evidence you've given us today. So a little bit on the fly. So thank you very much. We're going to have a good break. Yeah, unless there's anything else you want to add.
Mr. Chair, I think that's expecting a little bit more wastewater. But what I was going to suggest, though, before we do any more evidence, is a strictly enforced 5-minute break. Yeah, that was the intention to hear more evidence.
Yeah, okay. That was it. That could get the experts witness back.
Well, just to give everyone a bit of a freshen up, so I think we're just a strictly enforced 5-minute break would probably do us some wonders.
Have you got some clarification questions on wastewater?
We were to understand there was going to be some evidence presented today, which is why we've got Mr. Vic Hensley.
Oh, okay. Oh.
Is that
That's my questions too. To the start about the way.
Let's have a 5-minute break then.
Cool. Thank you, sir.
So that's to enable council to some more feedback, particularly with regards to wastewater.
So it's strictly just a break for us to get our heads booked. So if there's no more evidence from the submitters, regardless, we probably need 5 minutes to just have a break.
It's been a long discussion.
Okay, right, let's
Okay,
come back.
I'm just
at,
gonna-
2:05.
Stop the recording and mute the room.